Known as the Strongman, General Khalifa Haftar went from being one of the members of the officers group that toppled King Idris in 1969, bringing Muammar Gaddafi to power in Libya, to a renegade general commanding a self-styled army that fought to topple Muammar Gaddafi. Khalifa Haftar has always been at war. Haftar's military record is a mixed one and is open to different interpretation by supporters and opponents. Haftar has been described as Libya's most potent warlord, having fought with and against nearly every significant faction in Libya's conflicts, as having a reputation for unrivaled military experience, and as governing with an iron fist. His life is a long story of everything that shaped the political life of Libya over the years. Khalifa Haftar was born in 1943 in the northeastern town of Ajdabiya. He studied at Al-Huda School in Ajdabiya in 1957, and then moved to Derna to obtain his secondary education between 1961 and 1964. In 1964, he joined the Benghazi Military University Academy, where he met Muammar Gaddafi, and he graduated from there in 1966. He received further training in Nasserite Egypt and the Soviet Union. At the age of 26, he took part in the coup that brought Muammar Gaddafi to power in 1969. Therefore, he became one of the free officers who established the Jamahiriya. Shortly thereafter, Haftar became a top military officer for Gaddafi. He commanded Libyan troops supporting Egyptian troops entering Israeli-occupied Sinai in 1973. Haftar later became Gaddafi's military chief of staff. Haftar, who gained Gaddafi's trust, attained the rank of colonel in the 1980s, and in 1986 Gaddafi put him in charge of the Libyan forces involved in the conflict with Chad. During the war, in which the Libyan forces were defeated, thousands of Libyan soldiers were killed by the Chadian troops of President Hissène Habré. Haftar and hundreds of his men were captured as prisoners of war and incarcerated in 1987 after their defeat. For reasons still unclear, Gaddafi abandoned him and his men, refusing to negotiate with Chad, and denying that he had ever sent any soldiers to the region, probably because he had earlier signed an agreement to withdraw all Libyan forces from Chad, and Haftar's operations inside of Chad had been in violation of this agreement. The Chadian president Hissène Habré, who took power in 1982, had been an ally of the United States since his war against Gaddafi in the early 1980s. When Libya invaded Chad in an attempt of extending its territory into northern Chad, the United States and France responded by aiding Chad in an attempt to contain Libya's regional ambitions under Gaddafi. Habré took power when he successfully defended Chad from Libya in 1982. He took power in a coup backed by France and United States, and once in office, he received weapons and assistance from France and the United States throughout his rule. The United States had a hostile relationship with Gaddafi, who funded terror operations against the United States, most notably the 1986 Berlin discotheque bombing, to which the United States retaliated by bombing Libya.
My fellow Americans, at 7 o'clock this evening, Eastern Time, air and naval forces of the United States launched a series of strikes against the headquarters, terrorist facilities, and military assets that support Muammar Gaddafi's subversive activities. The attacks were concentrated and carefully targeted to minimize casualties among the Libyan people, with whom we have no quarrel. From initial reports, our forces have succeeded in their mission.
And the 1988 Lockerbie bombing. The Americans, who are trying to get rid overthrow of Gaddafi, viewed Hissène Habré as a bulwark against the Gaddafi government in neighboring Libya. After the 1986 United States bombing of Libya, which failed to kill Gaddafi, the America's CIA then shifted their focus on instigating an uprising of Libyans to overthrow Gaddafi. The United States needed someone from Libya to lead the uprising, someone who knows Gaddafi well. Probably this was the time the Americans discovered the worth of Khalifa Haftar. The America's CIA, which had provided substantial support to the Chadian president, Hissène Habré, and his government, then decided to call in a favor. After 7 months languishing in a Chadian prison, Haftar was approached by the CIA in his prison cell, and he was given an offer of turning against Gaddafi and joining a rebellion and forming an army in exile or rot in prison. Haftar, who felt betrayed by Gaddafi, was not hard to convince. The socialist pan-Arabist revolutionary became a KLA operative. A year later, he was funded by the US government, establishing an army in N'Djamena whose aim was to topple Gaddafi. This was the beginning of the Libyan National Army, LNA. The LNA was meant to become the military wing of the National Front for the Salvation of Libya, NFSL, an opposition group to Gaddafi which later became the National Front Party. The CLA then armed and trained Haftar, and 300 of his men with the aim of using them to instigate an uprising in Libya. In 1990, however, the pro-American government of Chad was overthrown in a coup that brought to power Idris Deby, Gaddafi's ally and a former ally of Hissène Habré. The coup had been supported by Gaddafi, and he demanded that Haftar and his men be handed over to him, as he knows all about Haftar's army after being told by Idris Deby, who was a former ally of Hissène Habré. Haftar and his men had to be evacuated by the Americans, first to Nigeria, then to Zaire, now the Democratic Republic of the Congo, then to Kenya, and finally to the United States. They became refugees and were scattered across the United States. Haftar, who received American citizenship, settled in Virginia, in a town populated largely by CIA employees. He was allegedly allowed to run a training camp for his Libyan National Army. In 1993, while living in the United States, he was convicted in absentia of crimes against the government of Libya and sentenced to death. While living in the United States, Strongman, mostly through his close contacts with the CIA, he consistently supported several attempts to topple and assassinate Gaddafi, notably in the failed 1996 uprising against Gaddafi in the mountains of eastern Libya, before returning to the United States. Haftar then vanished from the public scene, waiting for the right time to strike back at Gaddafi. That time came 2011. In 2011, a new opportunity for the America's CIA to deal with Gaddafi arises, which was the Arab Spring. Inspired by revolts in Tunisia and Egypt, popular protests break out across Libya. As the Libyan protests grew into an armed opposition, United States joined its NATO allies in providing air cover to protect Libyan civilians from Gaddafi's troops.
10 days ago, having tried to end the violence without using force, the international community offered Gaddafi a final chance to stop his campaign of killing or face the consequences. Rather than stand down, his forces continued their advance, bearing down on the city of Benghazi, home to nearly 700,000 men, women, and children who sought their freedom from fear. At this point, the United States and the world faced a choice. Gaddafi declared he would show no mercy to his own people. He compared them to rats and threatened to go door to door to inflict punishment. In the past, we had seen him hang civilians in the streets and kill over 1,000 people in a single day. Now we saw regime forces on the outskirts of the city. We knew that if we waited one more day, Benghazi, a city nearly the size of Charlotte, could suffer a massacre that would have reverberated across the region and stained the conscience of the world. It was not in our national interest to let that happen. I refused to let that happen. And so 9 days ago, after consulting the bipartisan leadership of Congress, I authorized military action to stop the killing and enforce UN Security Council Resolution 1973.
The CIA sent Haftar to Libya to join the fight. When the 2011 revolution and civil war began in Libya, Haftar re-emerged and decided to join the rebels. He entered Libya from Egypt in March 2011. He sought to become the rebels' military chief, but was instead appointed head of the ground forces by the National Transitional Council, NTC, and given the rank of lieutenant general in compensation. His nemesis was Major General Abdel Fattah Younis, Gaddafi's interior minister who defected to the rebel side, and the rebel forces commander-in-chief. Haftar's arrival sparked a raging power struggle about who should become the military commander. Younis was assassinated in July 2011. Some accuse Haftar of having been involved in the latter's assassination, but Haftar himself survived an assassination attempt the same month, blamed on Gaddafi. Gaddafi was finally overthrown and killed in October 2011.
Good afternoon, everybody. Today, the government of Libya announced the death of Muammar Gaddafi. This marks the end of a long and painful chapter for the people of Libya, who now have the opportunity to determine their own destiny in a new and democratic Libya. For 4 decades, the Gaddafi regime ruled the Libyan people with an iron fist. Basic human rights were denied, innocent civilians were detained beaten, and killed, and Libya's wealth was squandered. The enormous potential of the Libyan people was held back, and terror was used as a political weapon. Today, we can definitively say that the Gaddafi regime has come to an end.
In November 2011, Haftar was chosen as the overall commander of the new Libyan army due to his military experience and loyalty to the revolution that overthrew Gaddafi. After Gaddafi was toppled and killed, the country fell into chaos with jihadist groups capturing pockets. In 2014, Haftar appeared on TV, declaring war on the Islamists in Benghazi. His Libyan National Army launched Operation Dignity, which ousted jihadists from Benghazi and its outskirts. This was the beginning of Libya's second civil war. This is how Gaddafi was overthrown and killed in what until now many people believe was entirely Libyan uprising.